Hi, everyone. Welcome to What ADHD Teaches Us About Being Better in Tech by some product manager from Amazon. My name is Rawi Nanakul, and I will be your host today. And I am some product manager from Amazon that has been here for almost 5 years. I have done everything from running Amazon's largest Tableau server to now working on enterprise asset management software. Before we get into today's talk about ADHD, I want to make a disclaimer that I am not a medical professional. I am not a doctor. I cannot give you medical advice, nor should my information presented here today be taken as direct medical advice or treatment. Okay, let's get into the agenda for today. First things first, we'll talk a little bit about myself and how I ended up here on my ADHD journey. We'll talk about what is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. We'll talk a little bit about the psychology. And we'll talk a little bit about the brain and science behind it. And most of our time will be spent talking about the common traits. So hopefully I dispel some misconceptions that you have about the disorder, just as I learned about the disorder when I found out I had it. We'll talk about some strategies for coping, both in life and product management that I use every day. And then we'll summarize this information because if you have ADHD, why wait around and sit for this whole talk when you can just jump to the end? And I also have my resources that I'll share. So a little bit about me. I have a very unique work experience. I started off as a neuroscience researcher working at the University of California, Davis. I researched Fragile X, doing autism and dementia research. After I got bored of that, I became a Thai kickboxing researcher. I also want to point out that my 3 years at UC Davis Medical, no one ever pointed out that I might have ADHD. Then I decided to be a kickboxer where I have a Fulbright scholarship to Thailand doing Thai kickboxing research, or Muay Thai. I also have a master's degree from the University of Washington in the visual ethnography of Thai kickboxing. After grad school or during grad school, I decided I wanted to become a photographer in the beer industry. I've worked for national and local breweries and restaurants. From that, I spun off a beer festival called the Art of Beer, which has been a benefit for the Make-A-Wish Foundation. We were able to grant our first wish last year. So if you're ever in Sacramento and COVID isn't a thing, stop by my beer festival. When I'm also not working at my day job, I run Analyticon, which is Amazon's largest internal data conference and one of its largest internal data conferences, or largest technical conferences. And like all millennials, I'm trying to work on a podcast on the side. And this podcast is about how everyday people and businesses use their power and privilege to influence their local communities. I also have a 3.5-year-old who is a lot of my time and a lot of the energy I spend controlling chaos. I present all this as a long-winded way to say I have ADHD. And despite my accomplishments and despite all the things I've done, I'm constantly insecure about what I've done, who I am, my achievements. And I thought this was totally normal until I went to marriage therapy in this last year. And on our first session with my wife and I, in explaining to them, what our problems were, she looked at me and asked, "Hey, do you have ADHD?" And yeah, the rest is kind of history. From there, I sought out a medical test, a psychiatric eval. This is after the marriage therapist told me to take an online test, which was absolutely useless, and got a formal diagnosis. I now take medication for it, and I have regular check-ins with a health professional for it. So let's talk about what is ADHD. There's another name I also want to throw out there is variable attention stimulus trait, or VAS. This is a newer term It's very similar traits to ADHD, and kind of the early consensus is that it's similar symptoms, but kind of brought about by how much stimuli we have in the world. Right? Think about how often you look at your phone, you look at a screen. It doesn't share the same physiological similarities as someone with ADHD, a lot of the same kind of behavioral characteristics. So if you think that you might have ADHD, or you might actually have VAST, right? And that's okay. And that's kind of the big point of this talk is it's okay. So let's talk about the oversimplified psychological summary I have for ADHD. Having ADHD is like having a Ferrari engine for a brain with bicycle brakes. And if you can strengthen the brakes, you have a champion. And this was a quote written by Edward Hallowell. His book, ADHD 2.0, is kind of what inspired me to do this talk and really get into ADHD research. But he and another doctor are kind of the pioneers of ADHD. And this was a really great analogy I use, or that I connect with, because my brain is always working, but I have to be on the right thing. If I'm not on the right task, or if I'm bored, things go to heck. Yeah, so that's kind of the psychology. My brain is constantly looking for stimuli, for something to do, looking for a challenge, but I don't know how to stop it. Now, I'm going to oversimplify the physiological portion of this. If you're watching this and you're an ADHD professional or healthcare professional, I apologize for oversimplifying everything. And I hope that you as the viewer who is not a professional can go off and learn more for yourself. Okay, for the brain part, and remember, I used to be a brain researcher, is that we have the frontal cortex, which is the front of your brain, which controls a lot of executive function. And that's a fancy way to say all of the complicated stuff: autobiographical memory, personality, inhibitions. It's all kind of controlled by that area. Right, again, gross oversimplification. The other component is the cerebellum, and the cerebellum is used to regulate a lot of physiological functions. So if you want to walk, like if you want to do a fine motor skill, we often attribute that to the cerebellum. Current ADHD research would suggest that there is a mismatch or a underdevelopment in the cerebellum that allows, or that creates, an environment in which someone with ADHD is unable to switch between two brain networks. Okay, one is the task positive network. So it's that thing that tells you, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do this talk, I'm not overdue to get this talk ready for today. And the other part is the default mode network. And this is where you create and you ideate. This is where you dream, you just kind of wander, right? And you need to switch back and forth between these two realms. And that's how you function. But as someone with ADHD, I spend a lot of my time in this default mode network. I'm dreaming, but I'm also ruminating. I'm also thinking about my failures and thinking about my insecurities, which is a big hindrance to my life at times. All this to say is that someone with ADHD is neurotypical. It just means our brains are wired a little bit differently, and that's okay. All right, so that's the psychology and the physiology. Let's move on to what the experience might be like for someone with ADHD. I'm not going to talk a lot about the strengths. You might have seen other articles about how ADHD people are good at creativity, talking fast. You might have a preconception that someone with ADHD is just scatterbrained. They can't concentrate, or they're just going. It might be a crazy child, and you're just like, I don't understand why this child won't behave. But there's a bunch of stuff that they're good at, and there's a bunch of stuff that they have challenges with. But here we're going to talk about the good stuff. Crisis situations. I'm personally really good at crisis situations. It's why I like to kickbox, because 90% of fighting is crisis management. I love working under pressure, partly why I procrastinate. I love mastering new hobbies, right? These are all the different things that ADHD people do really well, but we kind of forget that as someone with ADHD, and we just focus on the negatives. And let's talk about those. I'm a pretty social person. I talk publicly pretty often. Yeah, I'm out in the beer industry. No one probably would ever accuse me of having social anxiety, and I'm pretty extroverted. But there's two types of ways this manifests. One is I do have a lot of self-doubt. I often am thinking, shit, 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 shit. Or I'm thinking, oh man, did I just say that out loud? Oh man, am I allowed to curse on this webinar? Are they gonna edit me? And that type of social anxiety will often block me from starting something, doing something, connecting with something. And if you're an introvert with ADHD and you have these, it's even worse, right? You just in this own island. But this is the realm of ADHD that was entirely new to me before I started learning about this subject. And someone near and dear to me suffers with this a lot more than I do. And understanding that has helped me learn more about myself and them. Right? So social anxiety is not just like anxiety with people, but that self-doubt, the insecurity. And that self-doubt is often manifested as, are they mad at me? Right? And related to that is constant rumination, meaning we often think about the same thing over and over. I've been sitting here trying to figure out how I'm going to do this talk. I hope they like me. Like, what the heck am I doing here? And it's a far more negative part of my brain. And I just thought this was normal. The kind of positive, positive side of this kind of anxiety and rumination can be manifested as workaholism. I have somebody that I know who is a workaholic. They most likely have ADHD, and they are praised at it at work, right? Because they're really good at their job. But when you talk to them privately, like, I wish I did other things. Right? So this rumination can be positive from a career aspect, but be at a detriment to personal and other types of relationships. And so again, like, this is a peek into my brain of, are they mad at me? Am I good enough? Did I do a good job enough? And I'm constantly thinking, no, I didn't. But in reality, probably doing okay. Okay, this is the last negative thing that I want to talk about with ADHD, is that if you've ever been frustrated with a coworker, I know that probably my managers have been frustrated with me. It's like, and being the person there on the left, just saying, just, you make excuses. It's not that hard. Just do it. You always shy away from challenging things. Like, why can't you just do it? And for the longest time, I thought I was just really crappy at my job. And I have underachieved at certain areas and overachieved at others. And I have this constant fear of failure that holds me back. So if you find yourself in this situation, if you're the person on the right and you're not sure how to start, we're going to talk about how to cope. But if you're on the left and you've been this person, or you think maybe you are that person, take a step back and remember, the person with ADHD has a Ferrari engine for a brain. It's your job and their job to figure out how to build these brakes, and those brakes are going to be built together. So let's talk about my strategies for coping with life with ADHD. Number one, exercise. I know that sounds oversimplified and a stereotype, but if you read the ADHD 2.0 book, it's one of the biggest benefits you can have. Apparently, I've been accidentally self-medicating for ADHD my entire life because I run over 20 miles a week. I also do kickboxing. That point earlier about the cerebellum is that if you work on balance exercises, martial arts, dance, those things that will bring more training to your cerebellum, will decrease your symptoms of ADHD. I take medication for ADHD. However, I take it not to focus, but purely to relax better at night. It's purely for sleep. Now, for some people, they need that to reduce their anxiety. Some people, they need it to focus. But I think because I run so much and I have all this physical exercise, I'm able to cope with it. The times that I've been really depressed and had a really hard time with life were the times I had injuries and I wasn't able to exercise for 2, 3 months or even less. So please exercise, the longer the better. Or two, I talk about it. I talk a lot, as you can see. The more that you can engage with others, the better off you are, because you are constantly fighting the voice in your head, right? That voice that is telling you, you're not good enough, you should quit, they don't like you. But when you talk about it and you share it and you hear other people that are not yourself say, hey, doing a good job, or hey, I really value you. That's that positive feedback that puts the gas in that Ferrari engine and puts those brakes in that you just go. And so please talk about it. It's why I'm doing this talk, because I saw that there weren't that many articles and stories about it in tech. Forgive and let go. And oftentimes, going back to rumination, we focus on these memories. And so you're constantly reliving a failure. I'm constantly reliving how I accidentally wronged a friend, how I messed up at work, how I didn't get a paper done. And there's just a ton of shame. In fact, shame can be a motivator to achieve. But you have to let those things go. You have to forgive yourself. You have to let go of those memories. Because the more you reinforce them, and research has shown that when you recall a memory over and over, the synapses for that memory or the bonds for that memory are strengthened over time. But you end up taking something that could have been very minor, right? Like something that someone said that they didn't even think about. And over the years, this builds into this major thing when there really wasn't anything there in the first place. So for your own happiness and contentment, you constantly have to just forgive yourself, forgive others, and just let things go and focus on the next thing. Recognize your own strengths and advocate for the strengths of others. If you're very insecure with yourself now and you're thinking to yourself, I have no strengths, I suck, which I'm kind of thinking about myself, be an advocate for others. There are probably people that you work with that are really great at their job. Let them know. I make it a point to constantly compliment the engineers and product managers and anybody that I work with, because Amazon can be a really lonely, tough place. But by doing just a little compliment, I'm able to connect with them. I'm able to work better with them. It's my job as a product manager to advocate for everyone, the customer, the engineers, leadership. And if I can't recognize the strength of others, I'm not doing my job. And I can use that strength, right, from when others say, hey, you're doing a great job, to find my own. And that's how I find my peace. And that's how I find my energy to keep going. Be vocal and vulnerable to help you find the right room. I've been thinking a lot about, what I want to do next with my career and in my life. And I'm like this kind of half filmmaker, podcaster, half, tech person. And I just constantly think I'm bad at what I do. A friend of mine pointed out, maybe you need to find the right room, meaning that maybe it's not me, maybe it's just the situation or the job that I'm in. So how do I find that, right? Like, how do I find my happy place? How do I find my dream job? I don't know. However, I do know that in my experience, being vocal about your dreams, being vocal and about what you want to do, and being vulnerable. And I'm being vulnerable by sharing my experience with ADHD in hopes that it helps you. And maybe you'll reach out. Maybe you are looking for a product manager who has a background in filmmaking, and wants to do something diversity, equity, inclusion. I don't know, but I won't find that room unless I talk about it. And so with ADHD, you need to kind of remove yourself from that insecurity and anxiety hole and just find that place, talk about it. Here's some bonus items. These are bonus strategies that I wanted to include in. One, mess with people with overly kind gestures. I am a product manager working across many different orgs. They don't have to listen to me. So what do? I thank them. I send them $5 gift cards sometimes. Sometimes I just send them swag because they help me out. I'm overly kind, and that brings me happiness. And it's a great amount of joy when I see, like, I have friends that I start off just being kind to them because they were jaded from being in the service industry. It brings me so much joy when I see them smile from just the random acts of kindness that I do. This last one here, create without expectation. This was recently told to me by a dear friend of mine who owns a brewery now in San Francisco, and he was a product manager before that. Create without expectation means to just do something without worrying about failing or succeeding. Oftentimes, when I start a new project, I have some big dream. I'm going to change the world. I'm going to talk about power and privilege. I'm going to be the next Anthony Bourdain. And all those goals kind of stop me from doing those things. If I just do them, if I just create or work on my hobbies without any expectation, I can just do it. Those fears are gone. Let's talk about product management. What are my strategies from a mediocre ADHD product manager? I'm kidding. Find your mission and why before you start. And with having ADHD, I need to be on the right mission. I need to have the right motivation. And we get things that we don't want to do, right? But when I get something and my heart's not in it, you can tell I'm either all in or all out. So as you're building out your why, or as you're bringing out your feature, your product, find your internal why and let that guide you. Let that help be your kickstart. Weight success and failure criteria equally. With ADHD, you hyperfocus. And that's why the terminology was updated from attention deficit disorder to attention hyperactivity, because it's not just the scatterbrain. It can be the hyperfocus to the point where you're watching the entire first season of The Witcher in one sitting, or you've just worked 8 hours on the same project. And the hyper-focus part, though, when you fail, you put that on yourself. And I'm firsthand experience of this, where when I'm designing remote maps, I need to know when to quit. Inherently, as product managers, we're working on things that may or may not succeed. We often over-index on making it succeed, but we have to be able to know when to just walk away. And when we set up those criteria to walk away, it makes it less of a failure on us. Right? It's most likely not you. There's so many things that can go wrong in tech, but it's rarely just one person's fault. So make sure that you have failure and success criteria so that you're never stuck in that hole or that tunnel. Make prioritization a process to iterate, less of a task. You might often hear someone say, hey, like, you have ADHD, just make a list. I don't want to make another list. I have enough lists. My desk is full of them. I don't get to them. But if I approach it as, hey, I need to build out all of these, we call them sims or tickets or features, or whatever you want to name it, in order to get this product lifecycle going. I approach it from that respect of, how do I iterate? How do I make this better? How do I advocate for the customer, rather than, hey, like, these are your timelines to make this thing, like, tell me how we're going to get there. It makes it less daunting and less annoying, right? And by that, I mean, I'm more likely to focus on it, because now I'm thinking about how I'm going to help someone else, and less so about setting failure points, or milestones that I think I might not meet. The other one I like to do with this, if you're stuck in this situation, is do it with a partner. Someone with ADHD, we need socialization and we need immediate feedback. I'm lucky enough that I have a great UX designer that I work with almost on a daily basis. And she and I, when we do our prioritization, we're going back and forth. It's not a vacuum. I'm advocating one way, she's advocating for another way, and we make these lists as we go. And she is able to help organize the chaos in my brain, and I am able to. I'm not really sure what I do for her, but we work in tandem. Right? We work in tandem to build great things, and it's so much more fun. Last thing about insecurity is it's easier to coach core PM skills than empathy and insight. I recently told my manager that I was interviewing at other companies and I was getting my butt kicked by the traditional product management interview. And I was told by one chief product officer at a company, it's like, oh, you're lacking core PM skills, but you had an interesting resume. That's why I wanted to talk. I told my manager this, and he said, as a product manager, my ability to empathize and connect with people was something that made me really special and good at my job. The book on core PM skills, in his words, is very thin, and that I needed to focus on that ability. Like I needed to come to terms with I am really good in the middle. And it makes me a very particular type of product manager. It doesn't make me a bad product manager like I think in my head, but it makes me a product manager that is around everything and able to communicate with everyone, but is not your hardcore security PM who knows a lot about a very narrow subject. I'm very lucky that he said this to me because I needed to pull that out. I needed to find my strengths. I needed to be unweighted by my insecurity. And I'm really lucky to have him as a manager. And it was one of the greatest lessons in leadership and ADHD, for that matter, that I've ever experienced. So thank you to him. All right, let's close this up. One final thing about ADHD and product management here. If you look at this comic, take away the ADHD storytelling part. Well, let's replace it with a product. Let's think about people think that the new phone, like the new Pixel, the new iPhone, they sat down and they built it and then it released. Right? But in reality, all the stuff that happened on the bottom, right? Like all the side tracks, the random questions and tangents, the kind of starting over from the beginning, hell, even the apology part. That's product management, right? This is why I enjoy it. Is because I do get to go down these random tangents and all these different questions. So my point here is that if you have ADHD, you can be a great product manager. You just got to find those breaks. But don't overlook your strengths, right? Don't overlook your creativity. Don't overlook your empathy. Don't overlook your kind of insight into people and even your workaholism, because that scatteredness down below is what we do. We are not the people on top. Our story is not that easy. If it was, we wouldn't do what we do. All right, let's take this home. In summary, your brain is like a Ferrari engine, and you are the PM to build the custom brakes. And you're not going to build it alone. You need to talk with other people. You need to engage with other people. And that's how you're going to build the brakes. And engaging with other people, treatments, could be even medication, but you want to find what brakes work for you. There are a lot of aspects of ADHD we don't see. Don't lose yourself. Don't suffer in silence. Don't let yourself suffer in silence, because that's the worst thing you can do. So because all that rumination, all those self-doubts, they have no one to silence them, and it's going to suck. There's a reason why people with ADHD have such higher prevalences for substance addiction. engage, don't dismiss. I come from in an Asian background. I'm a first generation immigrant, and my mom doesn't know that I have ADHD. So I don't think she'd understand it. I just haven't bothered to tell her. So don't dismiss people for this. Engage with them. My final thought here, and this is something I've been thinking a lot about myself with my career, is measure your life through the joy you bring and not by the things you didn't accomplish. I'm 37 years old. I have people that I work for somebody who's younger than me. I work with people who are far younger than me, constantly insecure about what I do. But then I look back at the people and places I've been and the things I've been able to do and the joy that I've brought to people every day. And that's what makes it fun for me. That's what makes my life fulfilling. So let go of the thought that you didn't finish something, you didn't fail, and think about the people you met along the way. And that'll be the fun part. Okay. Thank you everyone so much for your time. This last slide here is all of the resources. I want to thank the UW Autism Center and Dr. Sarah Woods for providing me a lot of the resources, and check out the ADHD book if you'd like. All right, take care. Add me on LinkedIn if you want to talk. Cheers.